Hello and welcome to a special edition of an inclusivity and diversity webinar from the Recruitment Employment Confederation. My name is Ornella Nisio and I am the Stakeholder Engagement Manager at the REC. On this webinar, we will be discussing how and why employers and recruiters can support candidates with a criminal conviction enter the labour market and also progress within the labour market. I'm joined by two special guests today, Ian Smith from the Department for Work and Pensions and Jacob Hill, founder of Offploy Recruitment Agency. Now, before I hand over to my guests for introductions, I just wanted to touch on why this is such an important topic. If we just move to the next slide. And the next slide. And the next slide. Thank you. So there's not only a strong business case to be made, but there's also a moral case to be made for supporting those with criminal convictions enter and progress in the jobs market. You know, over 11 million people in the UK have a criminal record. So refusing to work with candidates that have a criminal record means limiting your talent pool to an even smaller talent pool. You know, the majority of those who have a criminal record don't actually go on to, repeat the offence, and the vast majority do not actually serve prison sentences. I think there's this big misconception that everyone with a criminal conviction, everyone with a criminal record, has an extreme criminal record. There are minor offences which could lead to someone having a criminal record, and this should all play a part into whether you choose or choose not to employ someone with a criminal record. The REC, we are signed to Ban the Bots campaign, which is a great campaign which encourages employers and recruiters to remove the criminal background check tick box on an application form. This means that every candidate is judged on their ability to do the job at the application stage, and it's only later on where, during maybe interview stages that people will ask questions around criminal convictions depending on the job role, but we think it's fair to give everyone a fair chance within the jobs market. Furthermore, supporting people with criminal convictions also vastly reduces their likelihood of their reoffending rate. So, numerous research has proven that actually the more we help those that have spent convictions enter the jobs market, the more less likely they are to reoffend, which is obviously a great benefit to the wider society. Now, if I go to the next page, you'll see that this is an issue that the REC has been working on for quite a while now, and just last September we launched the new criminal records guidance for our members, which is on the website, on the legal helpline section of the website. Now, this information is only for REC members. However, if you join REC membership, you'll be able to access all our legal resources. The checklist that we have online for recruiters kind of gives a step-by-step guide as to what recruiters and employers should ask and what they should check for. Firstly, it's very crucial that you know your legal obligations as a recruiter. Some roles will require a DBS check, other roles will not require a DBS check. So it's important to understand what questions you can ask at the application stage, what questions you can ask at the job interview stage, and to train and educate your staff. As I mentioned, we have lots of legal resources and help on our website for members, and some resources like blogs for non-members. Now, if we can move on. And I just wanted to introduce our first speaker, who is Ian Smith, who works at the Department for Work and Pensions, who will just be given an outline of how the department is working to support those with criminal convictions enter the job market. Hi, Ian.
Hi, thanks, Ornella. Hi, yes, my name's Ian Smith. I work with the National Employer and Partnership Team, part of DWP, and I essentially work with employers and partners to promote diversity, inclusion and social mobility across the labour market. We've seen recently some massive changes, obviously with the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown, etc. So obviously that has had some dramatic impact in terms of the labour market makeup. You'll have seen media about how many people have claimed universal credit over the 6-8 weeks of lockdown. So our agenda in DWP is to promote social inclusion and enable employers to tap into as wider talent pool as possible. So that particularly obviously includes customers that are disadvantaged within the labour market. And pre-COVID, obviously that was, essentially very, very high profile, and it remains so for the department to promote those areas and particularly support offenders back into employment. And as I said, it's all about tapping into that wider talent pool. I work with the New Futures Network, and they're part of the Ministry of Justice, and they have a wide range of support and training that goes on in prisons. It's mind-blowing, to be honest, the amount of activity there is across construction, manufacturing, engineering, all sectors. So it's just really today to flag up to your members, Ornella, that don't forget about that work. And you're going to hear shortly from Jacob, who'll give some his own personal account. I know he's very passionate about this, about giving people a second chance. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. And you mentioned that, obviously we're in the middle of a COVID pandemic, and that's had huge economic impact on the labour market. Youth unemployment in particular is one thing which is expected to rise rapidly. Do you expect that unemployment within those with a criminal record will also increase during this time?
I think there is that potential, because without, to coin a phrase, employers will have obviously a broader pool of people. So it would possibly be easier for them just to pick people that have perhaps recently come out of employment, which is obviously understandable. But what we want to say is obviously people that are given the chance are much more, often much more committed. So it can help, with attrition and, with that loyalty. And I think, as you said, it's about doing the right thing. But we are anticipating, certainly in the next 6 to 12 months, to see high numbers joining the register, and we are planning for that.
And likewise at the REC as well, we are also preparing ourselves. We recognise that in a climate of declining vacancies and rising candidate availability, it's even more important to promote diversity in recruitment, so that recruiters and employers understand that it's not just a non-essential add-on, but actually in times of crisis, diversity is actually a crucial survival tool, actually, and something that would really benefit a lot of organisations. Now, if we just move on to the next slide, and I can introduce Jacob Hill, who is the founder of Offploy. Hi, Jacob.
Hi, Ornella. Thanks for having me on here.
No worries.
Well, the big question I'd like to ask is, when we think of a person with a criminal conviction, or when we think of an ex-offender, what image comes to mind? I did honestly always picture, I'd only ever seen The Shawshank Redemption, Orange is the New Black, Prison Break, and all of these different TV shows which shaped my perception of what a person with a criminal conviction is. And when I went through my own kind of experience, it really shook my world and my parents' world to change our viewpoints in life. And this is why I started Offploy. Now, Offploy is an organization just dedicated. Can we go to the next slide, please? Dedicated, it is to reducing reoffending and making society safer, and we do that by working with employers and people with criminal convictions to secure meaningful, mentored and sustainable employment. There's strong links between employment and reducing reoffending. There's strong links between candidates securing employment and paying more taxes, contributing to society, feeling part of society, feeling valued, and being able to be part of our neighbourhood. The fact is that 99.98% of prisoners will be released. They're going to become our neighbours. I want my neighbour in gainful employment, being part of society, being positive, being part of what we do in this world, rather than reoffending and going back to prison, because it's a double negative in terms of costs to us, and it's just more crime. So the reason I started Offploy was purely to mentor and support people with convictions to secure that employment. And I had to change my perception around what a person with a criminal conviction is. Could we go to the next slide, please? That 8% of people sentenced every year secure a prison sentence. 92% actually receive a community sentence. So when we are talking about people with convictions, it's not all prisoners. In fact, over 50% of convictions are for driving related offences. And that, as we heard earlier, the over 11 million people, that equates to 1 in 3 adult males between the ages of 18 and 52 years old. So I think we picture people with criminal convictions as potentially something from, as I say, Shawshank Redemption or something like Prison Break. But really, you'd be walking down the street and it'd be hard not to bump into someone who has a criminal conviction. And this is about changing our mindset on what does a person with a criminal conviction really look like, and how do my processes put off perfectly eligible applicants from applying to my roles if I want to choose from the widest talent pool possible. So when we think, what does a person with a criminal conviction look like? Can we go to the next slide, please? I honestly had everything I ever wanted growing up in life. I had 2 wonderful, supportive parents, and by the time I got to 16 years old, I had everything apart from a sense of fashion. If we could go to the next slide. Where I started a camping business to help students going to music festivals get everything they need to camp in one pack for 70 quid. And I started to win quite a few awards. Are you happy to click through the next slides? Just 1, 2, 3. So we pitched to Sir Richard Branson. We appeared on a BBC 3 TV show. And we even sponsored the UK's largest music festival. So for us, that was an incredible growth whilst I was, going to university and getting involved with starting my own business. I was able, by the time I was 21, to get 300 grand investment in this business. I was flying. I was, Yorkshire Young Entrepreneur of the Year. I'd won all these awards and accolades. I thought I'd made it. I thought life was great. Until, if we could go to the next slide. Until I was faced with significant debt from a failing business, and I made a stupid choice. I made the wrong choice, but I made a decision, and that was to try and repay my debt by selling drugs. I was arrested. I was, taken to the cells. It was terrible for me, but for my parents, for the people that were potentially victims of what I did, all of this, they probably felt it so much worse. So my parents had both had their homes raided that night when I was arrested, and both my parents are retired police officers, and my dad's a retired drugs investigator. So for my family, in one big decision, I absolutely turned their world upside down. I brought great shame to them, and they could just have easily have turned their back on me, and they didn't. And if we could go to the next slide. And I was sentenced to 28 months, and I was to go to prison. And if we could go to the next slide. And I started off in Armley Prison, which isn't pictured, but then moved to Wealdstone Prison. This is all in Leeds and North Yorkshire. It was terrifying. I was a graduate of university. I had 2 parents as police officers. I had all these things that I didn't expect would do me well in prison. My cellmate was called Mr. Big, which was absolutely terrifying, as you can imagine. I had no idea what was going on, and it was a real wake-up call. But where I expected to find hatred and anger and violence, I actually found a lot of people just wanting to try and put their past behind them, move on from it, get a job, but they just didn't believe that anyone was going to give them a chance. So why bother? They would, there were many people in prison mainly for drug addiction, many people in prison for, debts, for gambling, for what we call crimes of despair. And one of the main people I met was in this prison, was in the workshop I worked in. So Ian was telling some, encouraging people to get involved with the prisons and look at the workshops. So the workshop I was working in for the first 3 months was sewing together 200 pairs of boxer shorts every day. It was a fabrics workshop. But there were all sorts of workshops, from painting and decorating, manufacturing, and people baking in prisons. There's a lot of activity for those who will take it and use it. And there's a great way for employers to be involved from finding talent whilst they're training up in prison, or even having some of their service produced and delivered in the prison for them. People do that from coding on computers, marketing, producing materials. There's some amazing stuff that goes on in prisons. But my first job, as I say, was sewing these boxer shorts together. And my line manager was a chap called Ralph. And Ralph was your Hollywood prisoner. He was 6 foot tall. He had a skinhead. He had missing teeth. He had scars down his face. He actually had tattooed knuckles. You cannot write this stuff. And I said to Ralph, you'd have a great job in Hollywood after all this, Ralph. And he just said he will never have the opportunities I've had in life because he didn't go to university. He didn't finish high school. He didn't, have his parents around to support him. Ralph was in and out of the care system. Ralph put me to shame in all of this and really made me realize just how fortunate and lucky I was, but just also how employable Ralph was. And his biggest barrier was that he didn't believe in himself. And his second biggest barrier was when he has to disclose his conviction, an employer's going to file that application straight in the bin. This is the notion, this is the fear of all of this. So this is where, this is really like the startings of Offploy. And I was released from prison. If I could go to the next slide, please. And I started running employability courses for local people to get them the CVs ready and to start with their disclosing their convictions to employers, because this is what I really wanted to do. I want to mentor and support people with convictions to get jobs, and I wanted to be there for the employer. So if we go to the next slide, and our organisation grew very quickly. We're a team of 12 people now, and we support employers up and down the country. And the way we support employers, if we go to the next slide, is through a four-step easy journey. And what we've found is we're doing some studies with employers at the moment, and we've picked up on some studies by Professor Jerry Goodstein over at Washington State University, who's working with us. And he said, employers recognize certain benefits and certain challenges with working with people with convictions. So he said, the two main benefits that have come through his studies are loyalty of the candidates. And we can back that up and say, once we've placed a candidate into work, 88% are in employment after 3 months. We're still getting the data through for how many after 12 months, but it's amazing to see that you look at those retention figures based on the market. And these are not for, particularly extremely desirable jobs. We're talking about potentially low-skilled jobs in food manufacturing. We're talking about roles that have previously been put into people in construction, in all different levels, like working outside. We're looking at 88% retention of the candidates that we've seen going to work from some of the employers we've spoken to after at least 3 months. That's huge. The second thing the study picked up on was that employers are incredibly incentivized by giving second chances, by doing something social for society. So it's great to see that these are reasons why people are doing it. And the biggest challenges were that employers feel that they do need a bit of support in handling the HR, the application process, the what to do when someone's new to the organisation. And the other challenge is it's natural for people to have wobbles, but I think you'll get that regardless of the candidate that you're bringing into your workplace. And you have to be willing to accept in the early days of hiring people with convictions, it's going to be a little bit rocky and a little bit uncomfortable at times. But the idea is that with the right support, employers can do this sustainably. So we do support employers through a 4-step process, which I don't need to go into too much detail today, but basically I'm saying we help people ask those difficult questions and talk confidentially about what convictions, what burning questions they have about convictions. And I think we're going to answer some of those questions at the end of this call as well, which is brilliant. But we do support people to prepare them to hire people with convictions, to actually hire the people with convictions, to mentor and support the employer and the candidate, and then to report on their social impact and their success. So we found that that's a really powerful way for employers to benefit from this in so many ways, to win new contracts for the equality, diversification and inclusion targets for large bids and contracts. People with convictions is coming up more and more as a commitment from commissioners to see people being hired. So it's interesting now that there's real incentives to doing this. Can we go to the next slide, please? And the people we support, we have such a range of candidates that we mentor and support. So we do have people who have lived extremely chaotic lifestyles who are not ready for a job yet, and they need to go through our full 9-step journey in the most detailed of ways. And it could be 6 to 12 months before we, we believe they're ready to represent people with convictions with an employer that we work with. But we also meet many people who, you know, have convictions, but they've had a stable career all their life, and now their only barrier is their actual convictions. So we're able to help employers find, you know, chartered accountants, for example, or I've got people with engineering backgrounds, if you want to go to like the super brainy side of it all, that I've no idea about. But I'm just saying that when you think about convictions and people with convictions, there is an absolute spread and cross section of society of people with convictions. And as I say, if that represents 1 in 3 adult males between the ages of 18 and 52, we really do need to change our perception, not as people with convictions, but just as people and just as candidates ready to fill our vacancies and help us achieve our own economic goals. Offploy, if I may say in closing, if we can go to the next slide. Oh, can we just jump to the next slide? Maybe not. Okay. Oh, is it loading? That's fine. If I will say in closing, you know, in the 5 years that Offploy's been around, we've been able to advise over 1,000 individuals in terms of understanding their conviction and what they're about. We've been able to see over 200 people secure employment, and that's helped employers achieve their targets. It's reduced reoffending, it's making society safer, and everyone's winning when it comes to hiring people with convictions. I've realised I've talked quite a bit there, so obviously I think the next stage would be some questions, but as well after this, if anyone does have any further questions and wants to reach out afterwards, please do give us a call or send me an email. And if there are any employers hiring people with convictions and want to share their experience with Offploy, please do get in touch, because we are doing a study and we are trying to document the best practice in all of this. So thank you everyone for your time on that, and that is Offploy's journey.
Thank you, Jacob. I think your story is incredibly inspirational, and it's also important as well to highlight that actually anyone can find themselves making a bad decision and ultimately ending up with a criminal record. And you know, it is very much of the Hollywood story that we always hear, but yeah, it can happen to everyone and anyone, and it can happen to anyone, and everyone deserves a second chance. Within your work, I was just curious, and also Ian, feel free to come in and answer this as well. Are there any particular sectors where you think that, you know, there needs to be more education on how you go about, you know, recruiting and what the necessary steps are? Which sectors do you find, you know, quite hesitant, as it were?
Well, it's what's interesting. I think every sector is in need of talent, but the sectors that are in dire need of talent in terms of the really struggling, such as, you know, the construction sector has a significant skills shortage, manufacturing, hospitality, catering, all these organizations are, all these sectors, they seem to be putting their foot forward quite publicly now, saying, you know, we're open to hiring people with convictions. It's really good to see. I think, you know, the biggest barrier to people, it's a done thing now, is what I'm saying, in terms of employers are hiring people with convictions. But the biggest barrier at the moment are probably the senior leadership, the supervisor roles, the you know, the taking advantage of people's years of experience in looking for an employee. I think the more senior roles are fearful of recruiting people with convictions, and also maybe the accredited roles. So I'm thinking of the financial sector, for example. You know, yes, you do certain checks, DBS checks, based on certain roles that you're applying for, but just because something comes back on a check doesn't mean that they shouldn't get that role. A risk assessment should be done, and that doesn't exclude you from working in kind of regulated sectors. It's just things need to be declared and risk needs to be mitigated. So I genuinely believe if people are employing people with convictions now, it is happening. It's not a novel idea as much anymore, but I'm glad it's now becoming kind of popular discussion, which is great to see. And I think employers just need to be kind of supported on how to take those first steps, and employers need to be open to, as employing with, as trying any new scheme or new initiative, that it might not be plain sailing from the beginning, but it will get there.
I don't know if you want to work with.
I'm sorry, it broke up a little bit then. Would you mind asking that question again?
Yes, I'm just asking, are there any sectors that you're particularly keen to work with where, you may have a lot of, people coming out of the prisons keen to work in certain sectors, but, there's a lack of education there in those sectors?
Well, it's not actually a sector I'm mainly interested in, and thankfully I'm on this webinar, which is brilliant. But it's actually recruitment organisations. So recruitment organisations are in a real difficult, but also a real positive position in the sense that I get that there is pressure in terms of my clients want to do DBS checks on all our candidates, or I get there is pressure on my clients don't want to hire people with convictions, but we'd be open to it. The recruitment organisation that is working with people with convictions has access to more talent. The recruitment organisation that is able to steer, guide and support their employer with an organisation like Offploys or NACROS or any other organisation support, and gets their employers bought into it and on board, is billing more, is opening their jobs to more talent, is opening their jobs to talent that their competitors are not opening it up to. So for me, working with recruiters, as we do with Prestige recruitment specialists, as we do with Guidant Global quite publicly, is very much a case of helping them to ban the box, which I can go into a bit more about if there's time, but then also helping them to find talent with convictions, but then also convince their clients and work with their clients, be it on a prison visit, on a HR training day, to actually hire people with convictions, because the recruiter has then got a brilliant exclusive relationship with that employer, and they've got brilliant access to candidates which other recruitment agencies might not be tapping into. So I'm really excited about getting involved with the recruitment sector more than any sector.
Thank you. And we often hear from our members and other recruiters that actually I'm quite keen, I'm open to it, I want to widen my talent pool. However, my clients, they are not interested. How do we help recruiters kind of convince clients that may be a bit apprehensive? What's a good argument there for recruiters to take on board to their clients?
I think it is all about smaller steps, and not necessarily jumping 2 feet in, saying, right, let's get all these prisoners day release. So there is so many opportunities to start with this. So first of all, let's think about the equality, diversion, inclusion side, and it's what foot you put forward first. When you work with, for example, many organisations are wanting to work with, for example, homeless people or people in recovery from drugs or people in recovery and support of mental health conditions, the chances are that many of the candidates from those pools will also have criminal convictions, but it won't be their prominent label. And that's where it really comes down to, because a support plan / risk assessment will probably be put in place for all of the candidates they're working with from these kind of these diverse and equality backgrounds. So there might be people with criminal convictions in there already, is what I'm saying. So it's just about kind of with employers what foot you lead forward first. So for example, before COVID, the government were talking about a national insurance holiday for armed forces veterans who need to get back into work. Well, many armed forces veterans also have criminal convictions. I think I don't want to get the numbers wrong, but I remember there'd been about 3 to 5% of the prison population where I was were people from the armed forces. Now, an employer could benefit from the national insurance holiday of employing people with from the armed forces, but they could also benefit by opening that up to people from the armed forces with criminal convictions, and these are just starter steps to doing that. And my other argument, or my other invite is probably the right word, is very much to say to employers, whilst only 8% of people go to prison that are sentenced every year, let's go and look around your local prison anyway. Let's do it as a bit of a team training day or a team awareness day. There are initiatives that can be done. You can do it through Offploy, you can do it through the New Futures Network, you can speak to a lot of organisations that work in the criminal justice sector and say, you know what, I would like to take my team to meet some of the prisoners, see the workshops and get involved for the day, volunteer for the day. I've seen Ranby Prison does volunteering for the day in the prison. There's so many opportunities to just get people to have a no commitment kind of trial. Let's meet some people. Let's just have a conversation.
If there are any REC members listening in, REC is working with Rugby Prison in Nottingham. So if you are interested in going ahead to a prison visit, that is something that we can definitely organise. In fact, we were due to have one in March, but unfortunately COVID and lockdown hit, so we've had to reschedule. But if there is anyone listening that wants to come along, then we would be happy to organise it. You know, and thank you also, Jacob, for talking about that holistic approach that needs to be taken. I think sometimes when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we always think about people in boxes, and often people don't fit so neatly into boxes. So you're right, you know, it could be an initiative that's aimed at young people, but within that, there could be young people there with criminal with a criminal record, and
Absolutely.
you know, women or BME or disabled. So, you know, it is important to take a holistic approach and not just view, you know, one, you know, either one protective characteristic or one bit of a candidate. It's very important to consider the whole candidate.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Another question that we're very, you know, we often get is questions around DBS checks. Now, the REC, we do have a legal fact sheet. So if anyone has any kind of legal questions that they have that they're thinking of at the moment while listening to this webinar, I do encourage you to go onto the REC website and, you know, check out our legal fact sheet on this. However, do you have any advice, Jacob, and Ian, feel free to pitch in as well, on, you know, what happens if you if for instance, what happens if you find out that one of your candidates, one of your employees has a criminal conviction? You know, are they obligated to legally say whether they have a criminal conviction or not?
Ian, would you like me to answer this to start with, or?
Yeah, please. I mean, I think what I would just before you come in there is just make the point that obviously anybody that wants to go down the route of employing somebody, if they have a conviction, you would obviously do a risk assessment, and you know we can support with that. But that would give an understanding, or the employer an understanding about, you know, sort of minimising that risk. So, you know, with or without a DBS check, essentially there are things that you can do to, you know, mitigate that risk. But Jacob, do you want to talk about a little bit about DBS, because it's quite a tricky area, isn't it?
It is a tricky area, and thankfully Ofploy is a registered body of the of Disclosure and Barring Service. So we do DBS checks, for example, and that's just one way in which we sustain our service in terms of an employer can come to us and get a DBS check done. A DBS check is great. The second it's printed, it becomes outdated. That's one thing that we need to consider unless it's on the update service. And there's also there's proportionality of, you know, you can ask for a basic DBS check, as it were, for all roles, but there's certain roles where DBS checks, you know, at standard or enhanced level should not be conducted, and a DBS provider should be bouncing back to the employer saying this role, you know, doesn't require a standard or enhanced DBS check. So first of all, I'm mindful of when it's appropriate to do checks. Second of all, I'm mindful of what happens when something comes back on that check. Now, it is the DBS certificate goes to the candidate. It's for the candidate then to bring that and disclose that to the employer. We really do encourage candidates to write disclosure statements, or to at least prepare some disclosure answers to certain questions. We encourage employers to have a process when a conviction is declared, to not just have a free-for-all kind of, all right, tell us about it, but instead have some structured questions. And we support employers to ask what questions to ask. We have some templates available and some guides. And NACRO have a great guide called Recruiting Safely and Fairly, which is well worth reading on kind of what to ask about what to ask when a conviction is declared. On your DBS check, you will see a one-line statement for an offence, and that is the conviction. That is what the person was charged with. What you don't see were the circumstances behind that. What you don't see is the individual's character. What you don't see is the individual's ambition for the future and to putting that offence behind them. You know, there's incredible benefits to hiring people with convictions, but taking a DBS check for just the one line is probably not best practice, in my opinion. I believe doing a detailed risk assessment in consultation with the candidate once they disclose their conviction to you is the best way to go, and that's something we completely advocate for, and yet again would encourage employers to seek help and support on. It's not an onerous process. It's just something that once it's set up, it's then business as usual.
Thank you for that. And we often get questions as well around insurance. Recruiters or employers being worried about whether their insurers would allow them to take on someone with a criminal record. Some people say, "Oh, I hear it causes problems." What can you explain a bit more about that?
So insurance for people, hiring people with convictions, most of it is myth. In terms of there's well, if they've got an arson conviction, can they work in this factory? Can they do that? There are certain, I'm sure there are instances out there of insurers, and this is very much a policy by policy question. I'd say to anyone worried about that is show me your policy, or show me your insurance policy, and where it would say, you cannot employ people with convictions committed of certain offences, or people with convictions. I'm yet to come across anything like that. So I think it's very much a case by case basis. For your insurer, it seems unlikely, and I would completely recommend just looking at your policy to be sure. But really, what about employers who don't ask the criminal conviction question is what I'd say in that situation. And you don't know who you're hiring in that sense. How can you ever really know? And does that mean it'd invalidate your insurance? So that is one instance where I'd say, let's look at it on a policy by policy basis to see what's said. And if they do say something, let's challenge it, if it does say something like that, because it just seems a bit, who's an insurer to decide if someone's going to reoffend or not? It's worth further thought and further insight.
And we often get those questions over. I think probably one of the most common questions next to the kind of terminology, what does this mean? What does that mean? Is questions around, disclosing it to second parties. Oh, do I need to make clients aware? Do I need to make, other workers aware? Like, what are the and obviously there are legal implications around, disclosing about disclosing sensitive data, but what's the kind of, what information and what guidance is there for employers wondering about what they can and cannot say to others?
So there's I'll always go back to the NACRO Recruiting Safely and Fairly Guide, which is incredibly comprehensive, and the NACRO website, or the Dominic Headley and Associates group, they're also very good at kind of the detailed legal and technical advice. But if I could talk on a human level, let's say, without the policy behind it, in terms of what should we disclose of someone else. Now, when we work with people from diverse backgrounds, what do you disclose then to other colleagues and workers? It's dealing with the same level of sensitive information. Employers do not have a duty to disclose this person's conviction to the other people in the work environment. And what we usually recommend is that from a support level, that the organisation makes a decision to recruit and work with people with convictions. HR as a process, a secure GDPR compliant process of storing that information, removing it when it's no longer necessary, and then potentially informing a colleague that is supervising or supporting the individual if necessary. I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill for the majority of the convictions, and it's about working with individuals on a case-by-case basis to see what's appropriate. In terms of recruiters disclosing to their clients, I get that a recruiter is in many positions. So if they're a recruitment process outsourcer, and let's say this organisation directly employs the colleagues and delivers a fulfillment service to the client, you might say in that situation, well, if the recruiter's the direct employer, what's the risk there? What's the, it's the recruiter's risk and discretion to deal with. If you are perm placing someone out, or if you're temp placing someone into a client to go work on a client's site, you might want a different conversation, but it depends what the client wants to do. And it's about that, I believe it's about the wider conversation with the client as opposed to the individual's conversation with the client. So, in this instance, would you need to know about us supplying someone with a criminal conviction, or would you feel our risk process and management system is enough in place for you to feel confident that whoever we put forward, they are a candidate that we have risk assessed, we're happy with, and they may or may not have a criminal conviction, it shouldn't come into it. That's the holy grail of recruiters working with clients, because that means you control the process in-house, you access the wider talent pool, and you're putting more candidates in with your clients, achieving your deliverables. So there's a whole different ways of doing this. There's no rule book on this at the moment. There's no kind of definitive that it should be done this way, or this way in recruitment. And this, as recruitment, it comes down to relationships and the relationship you have with your employers. And I believe as a recruiter, I would want the best relationship possible where we get to make the decisions, manage the risk, and the employer doesn't necessarily need to know or might want to manage it in a certain way in their house. And as the recruiter, we're guiding and supporting them, further increasing our value to our client.
Thanks for that. That's incredibly helpful. And you know, we have some other questions here, but I'm very conscious of time. But if there was one thing that you would want people to know, what's the most common myth that you often hear about that you would like to kind of squash and dispel?
Yeah, the biggest misconception is that you need certain training, you need not licenses, but there's a certain way of doing things, otherwise it goes horribly wrong and you're the one responsible for any reoffending or the worry about the external brand or image. When I think of organizations benefiting from the recruitment of people with convictions, I know all of us listening to this know that Timpson's comes to mind, who, you know, advocates and champions the recruitment of people with convictions. Their shops haven't shut up. Well, recently have COVID for a bit, but what I'm saying is their business has kept going and it's kept growing. When I think of, you know, Greggs, who publicly hire people with convictions, Halfords, these are big name household brands that are recruiting people with convictions, and people are not leaving them. So my advice to anyone is just ask for help. Just reach out to an organization like Offploy, like NACRO, like Dominic Headley and Associates, like whoever is out there, and say, where do we begin? And let's do something small and something, you know, baby steps, work our way to it. And, you know, one day you might be the Timpsons of your sector that, you know, aims to get, I think it's 5 or 10% of their workforce as people with convictions, and does well from the business from doing it.
Thank you there, Jacob. That's incredibly useful, and something to also consider is that you know, there are huge employers out there who are leading the way and who are showing that it can be done. And as you mentioned, you know, the public are not. I think the majority of people in the public are actually on the side of inclusion and recognise that everyone deserves a second chance. So yeah, there are great examples to lead from. And just there in closing, just wanted to remind everyone that if you are interested in attending in viewing one of these skills workshops, either at Rigby Prison or other prisons in the Midlands, please do get in touch with the REC, because this is something that we're working with the DWP and MOJ on, and we're very keen to get more recruiters out there to kind of see what the skills provision is in prison as well. Because as you know, Jacob's story mentioned, there's a host of talent at the moment, and you know, they shouldn't be disregarded just because of one mistake that they've made. So go to the next slide. Just wanted to say thank you everyone for listening, and if you do want further information, please check out our website and see the legal fact sheet on recruiting those with criminal convictions. Thank you for joining us. Take care. Bye.